welcome to everybody. Today is October 20th, 2020, and we are with the City of Iowa City work session. And so I wanted to maybe have Jeff start us off to kind of catch us back up on the Iowa City area transit study that we started the conversation with last week or last meeting. So Jeff, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor. Good to see you in the council tonight. So at your last work session, you had a pretty lengthy presentation on the Iowa City transit study, and you didn't have a whole lot of time to discuss that. So we wanted to return to work session tonight and give you a chance to ask any questions that you have and provide staff any direction. Darian is here on the call and can answer your questions. The slides from the presentation were also posted in the October 8th information packet if you need those for a reference. And really what we're looking for tonight is we need three things from the council. One is general concurrence on the plan that was presented. That is the routes and the kind of the philosophical change in service. So fewer routes, higher frequency, focusing on those arterial roads in Iowa City. I want to make sure you're comfortable with that. We'll make any minor refinements throughout the fall and winter as we do a little bit more targeted outreach in the community. But want to make sure you don't have any major concerns with that changed approach to transit here in Iowa City. Second is the fare policy. We want to make sure you understand what we presented and what the changes would mean for Iowa City and for our riders. And if you're comfortable with that, we can begin to work with the city of Coralville to make sure our fare policies are indeed aligned. And our goal would be to be able to implement that change even prior to the route changes. And then third is any indication from the council on which of those add-ons that were presented, if any, that you want to pursue right away. So that would be things like evening service, Sunday service, new routes, fare-free transit, anything like that that's going to require extra budget dollars. We would like to have a good sense on which of those are priority one for you that you'd like to see implemented with the other changes. We can then return to you in the subsequent work sessions and give you some options on how to pay for those expanded transit services. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Mayor, to facilitate the discussion. And again, I'll defer to Darian on any questions that you have.
All right, thank you. So yeah, this is a great opportunity. I think we've been waiting quite a while for this study to come before us. And I think we'll just kind of jump into it from council and see where we land.
Well, it seems to me that the majority of the comments that we've gotten over the years is the need for the evening service. And certainly our city has grown, and there are many businesses out there that don't follow the 8 to 5 business schedule. So I think that is a very big need. And I think that might be a top priority for us to look at that and which routes might be needed and when to get started on that.
I'll go through those three questions briefly. The first one, do I concur with the philosophical change? I would say yes. And in that broad picture that was presented, I'm in support of it. I have a few comments on this particular issue. One is that, we're making adjustments to increase ridership, and there are some minor impacts on coverage. So that's something that I think we'll need to look at in a little finer grain as to how can we address some of those impacts that occur with the reduction in coverage in certain areas. And some of that has to do with how do we look at the connectivity to the routes that remain, so that where there will be a longer walk, what is the character of that walk, and in what ways can we improve the comfort and safety of it. Secondly, I would say in addition to the route improvements, considering how to improve the experience of riding the bus, which includes a walk or a bike ride at each end of the bus ride. It includes waiting at the bus stop, which is addressed in the presentation. And then it includes the ride itself. So I think it's interesting to kind of think of the bus. Before moving to Iowa City, I was without a car for 13 years and pretty much got about where I lived with the bus. Think of it as a mobile public space. And, in my experience, some of those mobile public spaces were really extraordinary experiences, and in other cases, not so much. So, if we're trying to attract ridership, the experience of the ride, I think, is important. And then lastly, on this point, numbering the routes, I think, was a good idea. I wasn't clear if that would also, if we'd keep the name of the route. So it'd say be like the 7 North Dodge or the 11 Rochester. I think there's something to be said for keeping the name while adding the number. Number 2, I support the revised fare structure, trying to make them consistent. And then in terms of some of the enhancements that are currently not within our existing budget, as I mentioned at our last meeting, I'm very intrigued by the fare-free transit service, which I think would have a great public benefit in terms of advancing equity, public health, and our climate response. I think we could consider ways to, in addition to identifying funding sources, opportunities for improving the land productivity that a free fare service could generate. I think trying to couple our mobility and transit service with our land use patterns is I think, a useful thing to think about. In terms of the Sunday service, I just wanted to throw out, aside from the cost of the Sunday service, which I think we had already identified, if we were to look at it as a service that would, we'd provide income qualified on-demand Sunday service, kind of like what we're talking about with the night owl service as another possible option. And then the idea of the on-demand night owl service, and again, considering that as something that could be offered to those who are on a limited income, either giving them a discount or just a voucher on that service. So those are my comments.
For me, I really believe that Sunday services and evening services is very important. As a first-hand experience with low-income people and minority, a lot of people was complaining about that they work on Sunday and there is no transportation. A lot of people complain that they work second shift at many factories around our area and there is no Sunday services, there is no evening services that go like for night hours. Anyway, I just mean that there is a lot of people who will be benefiting from Sunday services and, as Pauline said, night services. So I will encourage to have those. Going like free ride it will be ideal if we can have like free fare, Sunday services, and evening services. But if going free ride, it will affect, like fare free will affect the Sunday services and the evening services. I rather have it like discounted than like eliminated. Is really those important for the people to pay for it and to find the service than it is free and there is no service for them for the evening and Sunday. That's what my position is. Thank you.
Without going into the same deep level of detail that John did, I would say I'm pretty much in line with his comments in terms of going through general concurrence on the plan. I think the idea of kind of streamlining our routes makes a lot of sense. It's going to be a big change for people. And as John said, and they talked about in the presentation, some people are going to have a little longer walk, which they probably won't be happy with, but I don't think we can make these improvements and unfortunately and satisfy everybody But making, making the whole system so that it can run on time. I think as the presenters talked about 2 weeks ago, the idea that you have a reliable system, you know what time the buses are coming, and or during certain periods of time, you have more frequency, shorter headways, so that people aren't waiting for an hour if they miss the bus, kind of thing, I think is really important. Yeah, getting the fare policy aligned with Coralville, and so that makes sense for people in terms of what works and what will get them from here to Coralville without a second ticket, et cetera, I think is really important. In terms of the add-ons, I know there's been a lot of requests for extended night and Sunday service. I would like to see us tread very, very carefully there because of the cost, and really look at more of an on-demand, income eligible type situation, not just running the buses on the exact same schedules. The other thing that concerns me with doing the regular bus schedules is if we're running that, then we have to run seats. And so I'm not sure if that that Sunday service number that they gave us of 780,000, if that includes what seats would cost for running those hours as well. So I think, not that I don't want to run seats, I do, but again, trying to keep in mind what we can afford and how we can do this as efficiently as possible. Looking at those later evening and Sunday routes as an on-demand, income eligible, and really trying to start partnering with some of the businesses to help pick up some of those costs potentially.
I'll jump in. I did have one question really quick for staff. The enhancements list that was in our packet and the pricing for those, is that based on an assumption that we would go through with the preferred alternative changes that were presented, like sort of as step one, because that's all sort of budget constricted, and then those enhancement costs are based on, we would also have the preferred alternative first, but then add those on? Is that right?
That's correct, Counselor. Yes. So it's a presumption with all of the vision items is that the preferred system design would be intact, and these would be enhancements on top of that.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. So I think with that understanding, yeah, I also agree with the philosophy. I also agree with hopefully very soon, short-term fare policy, making that consistent, and the changes that were recommended there. As far as the add-ons, I do like the idea of on-demand service, especially for the late night. I think the presentation indicated that maybe on-demand for Sunday wouldn't be feasible just because of the costs involved. But I think one thing that I heard from people who need service maybe outside of those core hours is that it may not always be exactly the same route. It may not always be exactly the same location. And so I think the on-demand flexibility, I find that appealing for those lower volume that would be expected there. And I also have heard the community's call for Sunday service. And so just having, whatever the kind of break point for that would be in terms of the fixed route versus on demand, I would trust the expertise of staff on what makes the most sense there.
So I'll jump in now. I mean, I agree with the general structure. I have to say that it basically cuts out the area where I live, and it's not going to be walkable, which is sort of out Melrose, and so that's and that there were a number of riders out there. So that to me is really sort of the only, is there any way to serve that question? Otherwise, I'm in agreement with the general simplification of the system. When we were shown what it currently looks like, it made it really clear why we need to simplify it, and how also having numbers. And I think, John, they said in addition to the names, numbers and names, so that people don't get confused, but they can be clear. You're just going to get on the number 1 bus here if you don't necessarily know the geography, or the number 10 bus. And what they're trying to do made a lot of sense to me. I also agree that we should strive for fare consistency as soon as possible, because that's a real barrier, getting from here to Coralville and back, and being able to have consistency there across the fares. In terms of the add-ons, what I was looking at is what other folks are talking about, but largely services that the public has really said that they want, and that do not require an additional one-time capital outlay. So those are things like some form of Sunday service, whether it's consistent or on demand. The later night weekday service and on-demand night owl service would be the ones that would seem to me, particularly for folks who are working and don't have any other form of transportation, would be the ones that are really key.
One of the questions I have is what you just kind of referenced is the operating versus the one-time capital cost. So when I look at, and I don't know which slide it is, but for the fare-free Iowa City Transit service, I understand the one-time capital cost is 4.9 million, and then it's 2.2, almost 2.3 million for the operating costs annually. For the Sunday service, improved Saturday service, late night weekday service, and on-demand night owl service, and one more, on-demand service in low-density neighborhoods, those don't have any one-time capital costs associated with it. I wondered if staff could just speak to that for a second.
Sure, Mayor. Yes. So yes, you see kind of a hefty price tag in terms of capital for the fare-free alternative or enhancement and the 15-minute service on multiple corridors. And that is because of the additional buses that would be required to support that level of either service level in the case of the 15-minute service, or the expected ridership increases, which estimates are between, for fare-free option at least, estimates would be between a 40 and 60% ridership increase, which would mean we would need to strategically add additional buses to certain routes because it becomes a much more attractive option. So in comparing that to Sunday service, improved Saturday service, and those down the line, those are during those times when we don't have as great of demand on our fixed route system. So we have excess bus capacity that are not running at that time. So we would need to buy extra buses or acquire extra buses in order to provide that service. We'd be able to do it with the buses that we already have today.
Great. And I know we have some electric buses in that as well, which is good for our climate action goals that we're trying to achieve. For the operating costs, that includes staff salary. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So, and one last thing, I just want to make sure that the operating cost that we anticipate for the free fare is $2.2 million, almost 2.3.
That is correct.
Okay. All right.
Annual. Yep.
Annually.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So great job to the staff for doing this. One of the, a lot of the things I'd certainly agree with our counselors on. As I'm looking at the numbers, Jess, with the operating costs, and I look at Sunday services, if we look at the operating costs for just the free fare and look at the Sunday service, the improved Saturday service, late night weekend service, on-demand service, I'm at 1.7 million right there. And then if we add the on-demand service in low-density neighborhoods, I may have messed up there, but I think we're still within the area of one line item of the free fare. Am I calculating that correctly?
Mayor, I'm not sure I got all of those down that you were trying to sum up. If you could repeat them, I could go
Yeah,
ahead.
so it's the Sunday service.
Okay.
The improved Saturday service, the late night weekend day service, the on-demand night owl service, and on-demand service in low-density neighborhoods.
I can pencil that out for you in just one moment.
Okay.
And by pencil, I mean calculator.
It's roughly the same, Mayor. It's a little bit less than 2.3 million.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking. My calculator kind of missed a number or got an extra one in there at the end. So as I look at this, and I know that there's huge benefits to free service, fare free, and I wonder if we don't look at including these other options that we've heard from the public on, and granted, we don't know what the ridership will be on Sunday service, but we know that it's needed for some individuals in our community. We know that late night services are needed. We have workers that work, 3 to 11, so they can't get home at 11 unless they, use a cab or something like that, or a Lyft or Uber. And then we also have, kind of this night owl on demand for people that, some early morning or late in the middle of the night type stuff. So I personally think that we should look at those options, incorporating them. I know that our Mayor Pro Tem just made mention that if we had to kind of somewhat sacrifice the fare free a little bit, maybe we want to relook at who we might give some reduced fare to, free fare to. That's where I would be. I know that we currently have certain hours that we give free fare for persons with disabilities and that type of stuff. I would certainly recommend, which I believe that was a part of the presentation, where we would just do free all day. And so that really could be the portion where we just kind of uplift those current restrictions, and then maybe the free fare we have to look at a little closer. But I believe the services are really important within our community to allow people to get to places where they need to get for work, but also Sunday service, not having that available, I believe does limit a lot of people to engaging in greater activities beyond just their neighborhood. So that would be my thoughts on that. Otherwise, going from the 26 routes to 13 routes, I think that's great. And yeah, I'll leave it at that, because I think everybody else has kind of said everything that I would have said.
Could I ask again what possible funding sources are for this, aside from what we bring in from fares? And it seems to me there is some, I know that we got some grant money from the CARES Act from it, but otherwise, are there grants available, or how would we go about funding this?
Yeah, I can comment on that briefly. So the most of the grants that are available are going to be focused on the capital side, on bus acquisition, like we just got for our electric buses, facilities, those types of things. There might be some very targeted operational grants, but those are fewer and further between. So really, for funding sources, you're probably, it's the same ones that come up with any discussion that you're going to have. We're going to look to property taxes. We're going to look to utility tax. We're going to look to perhaps a local option sales tax, depending on the final number that you're looking at. And then I believe there's an opportunity to look at parking too. The challenge with that is, you all know where our parking dollars stand. We're a year ago at this time, we were in a really good position to be able to leverage parking dollars for transit. Right now, we're lucky to be breaking even on our parking budget, and we're not doing so in all months. So to be able to use parking is really dangerous at this time. We do have some CARES Act dollars that we have some flexibility with, and kind of where my mind is right now is to look at some of these expanded services with a pilot project that's funded with CARES Act dollars, and then allow us again to come back in a year, maybe 18 months, and look at the numbers and the cost per ride and some of those things before you commit a longer term funding source like a property tax. But 2.5 million, 2.3 million, you don't just kind of find that in the budget. You're talking about a significant property tax hike, we're at 1% utility tax right now. You're talking 2 to 3% on top of that to get that kind of revenue generation. And then, of course, local option sales tax could certainly pay for that. But you all know of all the kind of the wish list items out there that the community would have for that funding source should you want to pursue that. But that's kind of our next step, is to break that all down for you, tell you exactly how that would work, how we might leverage those CARES Act dollars into some pilot projects. And if we do a pilot project, I think it's safe to say you have to commit to at least a year to 18 months at minimum for a project like that. You don't want to offer Sunday service for 6 months. That's really not going to tell you much. So we'll put some of that together and return to you and see what your thoughts are on those sources.
Darian, can you explain again with the on-demand night owl service, kind of how that would work, and how could we potentially use that as part of a pilot in terms of the improved Saturday service and maybe even for some Sunday service without the full-blown fixed routes?
Yes, so essentially this would be an income qualified or any type of qualifications that we would want to put on it. But ultimately it would be sort of a back end, and I don't have all the details, Susan, to be fully honest. We were sort of waiting to see what direction we might get or what interest we would get from the council. But it's my understanding that it would be subsidized in some way, so that either income qualified candidates in the community or the full community would be able to access some sort of a ride sharing service that we develop a partnership with, or alternatively, or a taxi service. So it wouldn't have to be, an Uber or a Lyft. It could be a local taxi service or any other transportation provider. So it would more or less be an agreement, and then there'd be fundamentally some way to connect, whether it be through an app or whether it's it's a call and schedule service, but they would ideally then be subsidized. That's sort of how the program's structured.
All right, so any other questions or thoughts for staff? And then I also want to make sure that Darian and Jeff have enough to go off of for now.
Yeah, so I heard general approval of the new route structure, and understanding that you're not giving it your final stamp of approval, but allows us to move forward with implementation plans and final public outreach. I heard clear indication for fair consistency, and just to be clear, that does include expanding to our free passes that we have in place to peak hours. Currently, they're limited to off-peak hours. So we will move forward with that and have those discussions with Coralville. And then on the enhancements, we're going to focus in on Sunday service, and then the late night services, both weekday, weekend, and the on-demand services. We'll kind of hone in on those. We'll give you a little bit more details on what that might look like, hours of operations, those types of things, and begin to paint a path forward for funding those, and get your preference on what that looks like. So if I missed anything, let me know, but I think that's what I came away with.
All right, I'm seeing a consensus, so Great. All right, I think we are going to stay with staff updates a little while longer and talk about some operational changes during the winter weather that we just had yesterday, a little snow that surprised us all. So, Jeff, I'll probably have you start us there.
Yeah, it's 2 years in a row we've had an October snow, a fairly sizable one. So thankfully this time of year it doesn't stick very long, and it doesn't really cause a whole lot of problems on the roadways. But we do know the colder weather's approaching, and the memo we provided really sums up our operations, I think, pretty well. But we have a couple of new counselors that haven't been through a full winter yet. And I think it's always a good refresher, because you will certainly hear from the public who has thoughts on either our snow removal practices or their neighbors' snow removal practices. It's just a very common thing that we all hear about over the winter months. So we want to make sure you are familiar with those processes. I'm cognizant that you have a lot to talk about this evening with your work session. There's several IP items that we wanted to get your feedback on too. So maybe I'll just open it up and say, we're happy to answer questions, whether that be on our practices or on kind of what the responsibilities of private property owners are. We can answer those, or if you prefer, the staff is prepared to kind of walk you through that memo. But we'll start with questions and see where it takes us.
Well, one question or comment perhaps that I was reminded of in looking at this memo, and thanks for putting it out, had to do again with the question of snow removal on the curb ramps, which, just following up, for example, on our discussion of bus transit service and the need to be able to get to that bus route in order to take advantage of it. And the role in which a fully accessible path of travel to that route is important. And in my experience living here, the curb ramp situation in the wintertime is a major problem. It pretty much makes, unless you're willing to walk out into the street, access is really constrained and impacted by that. So I had some time this afternoon to look at, I was kind of curious what other Iowa cities are doing on this. And I found that in Coralville, Cedar Rapids, and Ames, it is identified on their websites that it's the adjacent property owner's responsibility. So just throw that out there. That's how they've defined it. And, I understand in looking at the language in the Iowa Code, why one might say, well, we really can't require the property owner to remove that snow because it's not the result of a natural event. On the other hand, there are cities in Iowa that do identify the adjacent property owner as responsible. In any event, I would say that the way it is now is really a problem. And whether it's possible, if not changing the language to say that it's the adjacent property owner, and perhaps exploring ways, particularly in areas where we do have high levels of walkability, that our snow removal trucks try to limit the amount of snow, the pile of snow that is left along the curb at the ramps. It really does impede an accessible path of travel through the winter months.
Any other thoughts or on this item?
The only other thought I had was that there are some of the really wider sidewalks that people have been using for exercise now, particularly when so many people are still sort of hanging out at home because of COVID. Does the city clear those? For example, there's a very wide sidewalk along a chunk of Mormon Trek, as well as other places that don't appear to be the job of any one property owner there. Is that something the city takes on, or how does that get cleared?
In those cases, it's the property owner's responsibility to clear that. What we're doing this year to try to broaden some of the outdoor recreational opportunities with COVID is clearing more of the trails within our parks and our public system. So an example, probably the most prominent example would be Terry Trueblood. In past years, we haven't cleared that trail, and people have used it for snowshoeing and other things, but we're going to clear it this year, just knowing it's been very popular during COVID. But if you think of kind of Scott Boulevard or Mormon Track, unless I'm mistaken, staff can jump in if there's certain segments of those roadways or other examples. That's the property owner's responsibility.
This is Eleanor. I think there are a few sections of Mormon Trek, for instance, if the abutting property owner is still in the county, then that property owner does not have the obligation to remove the snow.
We can look at those. I'm not sure. We'll have to kind of zero in on those, but we can look at them, and if we're not clearing them already, which I presume we probably are, but if we're not, we can certainly look to add those.
I just think we all need to, as one of the newbies, I just think we all need to be especially cognizant of that this winter, because I constantly see people out for walks in our neighborhood who didn't used to walk pre-COVID. So it's really a major part of the COVID lifestyle right now. So.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? We'll move on to COVID-19 updates. Any thoughts there? I did want to mention that I have been in conversation with some Big Ten mayors, some cities that have Big Ten football groups. And so we did release a letter that we all collaborated on, and thanks to Mayor of East Lansing, Michigan, Mayor Aaron Stevens. He was the one that really helped bring this group together, and great conversations. There's a lot of concerns, of course, with football activities taking place, and not only that, but other activities when there's large groups of people. Now, we do know that here in Iowa, we will not have, it won't be open to the public like it has been in the past. And so just know that that is of great concern. Although we do support, safe activities in the community, and just know that we're really looking at what the positivity rates will be very closely here at the city. And I know our county is also going to become very hypervigilant as well at ensuring that we're doing all that we can to keep our public safe. So just wanted to mention that the Big Ten mayors have all had conversations, and we'll continue to collaborate as we're seeing things throughout our own communities.
It won't surprise you that I have something to say on COVID, since has been my hobby, one of my hobby horses. That's great. I'm really glad that all the group of mayors got together. A couple of things that sort of just appeared today is the CDC has announced that the excess deaths between the January and October is over the normal is 300,000. And I know that the sort of the official toll right now is around 220,000, which is still way too high. And the chief epidemiologist at UIHC, Jorge Salinas, has also just done an interview in which he is really highlighting the need to take measures. There are basically virtually no measures in place now. in Iowa, and he's really concerned about the rising rate of hospitalizations overall in the state, and concerned as we come into flu season at the same time. So I just really, everybody's tired of this. We're tired of having to watch out. We're tired of having to talk about COVID, but it's not going away. And so I just, make the same plea as always. Please wear a face covering. Please social distance yourself socially. Please do whatever you can to protect others.
Yes, I'd like to echo Janice's comments and thank you, Mayor, and the other mayors for making that statement. And I think the real concern here is going to be the behaviors and what's going to happen with the games and folks watching those games and getting together to celebrate, and the activities in the bars and the restaurants. And I would just encourage all the owners of any of those types of facilities and people in general, just to encourage vigilance and do, as Janice says, wear masks, do the social distancing, avoid shoulder to shoulder crowds, and we can still cheer the Hawks on. So just be vigilant.
I just had a quick question about city staff policy relating to face coverings. I saw that the University of Iowa recently changed their non-hospital face covering policy to essentially say that face shields by themselves may not be sufficient or aren't as good as a cloth face mask or disposable, face mask. So I didn't know if we had any intention of changing the internal policy. I think we've been allowing either one. And as we learn more about the science and how the virus spreads, that may be something we're looking at. Or
we did briefly discuss that. It's probably been 2 weeks or so ago when I think the state had updated some guidance on that, and we opted to stay with that being the choice of the employee. So face masks by themselves are still permitted internally. Of course, we'll continue to kind of look at the evolving science and PPE guidance, but for now, face masks are still sufficient for us.
thank you.
Yeah, so Susan I got a text from Susan. She just lost connectivity and she's trying to get back on.
Okay.
The library did change its policy when I was picking up a book the other day. I normally or often been wearing a shield, and they said that wasn't going to do it. So fortunately, I had a mask, so I put that on instead.
Okay. All right. Well, Corona is definitely still alive and well, and we're tired of it, I know, as a community and as a nation, and even throughout other parts of the globe. And so, yeah, we just have to keep going for now, and hopefully soon this will be behind us. We'll move on to our discussions related to Black Lives Matter and systemic racism. And yeah, we'll just kind of open it up from here. We just finished our 6th series of some of the listening posts that we had in the communities, and I really valued all the voices that came out to be a part, and it was great conversations. So I'll just leave it at that and open it up.
Appreciated not just all the people who came out to all the forums, but also the people who wrote in, and staff's efforts to really compile all the information and put it together in a place so that we can go through it and draw information from it.
Yeah, Mayor, I know that a little bit later on our agenda for the work session, I think staff's looking for some direction relating to the follow-up from those listening posts. I don't know if we should jump into that now or if you have other.
Yeah, I think now would be appropriate to kind of jump into that. Maybe we can start we'll just bring IP 6 from October 15th into this conversation. I think that would be appropriate.
Well, Mayor, maybe I can help jumpstart the conversation here. And I also think that there was some great value in those listening posts, and thank you all for the extra time that you put in attending and leading those posts. We are at October 20th today, and December 15th will continue to come, December 15th will continue to come very quickly, and that's the date that we've targeted for the preliminary plan per your June resolution. I want to let you know that staff's prepared to put together that plan, and what we would look to do tonight is to hear some guidance from you, anything specific you want addressed in that. But I fully believe that through just observing the conversations at the listening post and hearing you all talk over the last couple months, I have a pretty good idea on where we need to go. Now, when we present this plan, I want to be clear that this is not a staff plan. We have to get it out, but we're going to put together something that I think is reflective of what we believe you and the community are asking for. It's also not a final plan. And I think you were very intentional in June in saying this is preliminary, because you're going to want some time to vet the different things in that plan. You're going to want to allow the community, you're going to want to allow your boards and commissions, you're going to want to allow your new police chief to all weigh in on the contents of that plan. But we do need to get to work to put pencil to paper so that there are concrete things to react to. So again, my hope tonight, if it aligns with how you see this process going, would be for you all to share your takeaways from the listening posts, indicate something that, indicate anything that you really want to see in that plan, and then allow us to come back to you on December 15th with that written report that then the community can begin to vet, and ultimately you can reshape and finalize in the spring of 2021.
Well, with that in mind, and thanks for the clarification, the last month or two, I think, has been a really useful opportunity to both share with the community our thoughts, hear from others, also learn more about some of the services that are already provided. And the framework that I've tended to try to put all of that into is the framework that IFR had presented back in August, as part of their community wellness and accountability architecture was how they referred to it. And it had 5 different elements. They referred to some response teams, but I'll just perhaps describe them as elements. And they were mental health, anti-homelessness, interpersonal conflict, road safety, and drugs and alcohol. I think in my mind, the mental health, anti-homelessness, and interpersonal conflict, at least in many respects, were covered very well in the listening posts. And I think we got a pretty clear understanding of how some of the existing agencies play various roles in addressing those needs within the community. I did hear a lot of interest in the CAHOOTS program as something that could further advance our work in those areas. I've read several articles about CAHOOTS over the last several months. And just over the last few days was looking at where, if anywhere, other cities are beginning to adopt that program, and found that it does appear CAHOOTS has consulted with Portland, Oregon, and Denver, and they have launched pilot programs modeled after CAHOOTS. And San Francisco will be introducing its first crisis response team next month. So there are there are cities, and this is where it's so nice to see that we are in this moment where we can try to glean from other cities in terms of what other practices are showing up. So I think in those three of the 5 areas, I think Iowa City is really well positioned. We have good working relationships between the police department and those agencies. So with the one added element that I keep hearing of cahoots, I think we're really moving in a very positive direction in those 3 areas. In terms of road safety, I have had conversations with IFR, I've had conversations within the community. There were comments, not so much at the listening post, but at the end of that memo that Jeff prepared, references to traffic law enforcement. And that's an area where I do think we can make progress advancing Black Lives Matter. We do know that there is disproportionate contact with our traffic stops, which, as I recall, are over 12,000 a year. So we do have data indicating, that disproportionate contact. And so I'm trying to identify, and I've spoken at some of our previous work sessions and in conversations about several strategies which I think could be useful in this particular area. The simplest one, in some respects, would be to better design our streets so that the speeds we want drivers to adhere to are matched by the roadway conditions. A term that's often applied to this notion would be that the streets would self-regulate, meaning the speeds we want to see observed by the drivers, the road is conforming to those speeds and the drivers follow the lead of the road design. Road diets are a really good example of that. There's a clear benefit to the road diet in terms of basically telling the driver to slow down. And with the slowed speeds, there tends to be a dramatic, significant reduction in traffic collisions. And then, of course, there's the benefit in that the police have fewer reasons to interact with the public by way of a traffic stop when our streets are self-regulating. So that is, I think, the ideal approach in that it achieves our goals as it relates to Black Lives Matter by reducing the number of times that a police officer will interact with the public in order to enforce traffic law. And we know there's disproportionate contact there, so there's that benefit. Another item that we've talked about in this matter would be the question of trying to eliminate some of the minor infractions, the classic defective taillight situation, citing individuals for jaywalking, things of that sort. If we just simply limit those practices to really what I would argue might be called the most essential reasons for a traffic stop, which would be, say, driving while under the influence is one example. The goal being, again, to try to limit the number of traffic stops to what's really essential and avoid the situation of a traffic stop for a defective taillight morphing into a really tragic incident, as often happens. And then the third item I would put forward would be the idea of traffic cameras, either for enforcing speed or red light running. There's a lot of good documentation supporting the use of them in terms of improving traffic safety. And then again, the benefit as it relates to Black Lives Matter is it takes the discretion away from the police officer in terms of enforcing that traffic law relating to speed or red light running. And since we do have a history of disproportionate contact, taking that bias out of the decision as it relates to those issues of speed and red light running would have a benefit as it relates to Black Lives Matter. So I do think there are some opportunities there that, again, would address Black Lives Matter, and then I'm always looking for something that have the co-benefit. It would have a general benefit to the public by dramatically improving road safety. So the last item then would be drug and alcohol use of the 5. I think as it relates to Black Lives Matter, you know, clearly, and the general public as well, would be to try to decriminalize marijuana. That might not be, that's not something that we can do locally, but I think advocating for it is something we should be considering. And then that leaves alcohol use. And I haven't had an opportunity to really explore that either personally or in conversation with others. I do know we have a lot of work that's being done in that area. We have the Partnership for Alcohol Safety. The university has its own alcohol harm reduction plan. But that too is an area where there's quite a bit of police activity. That, you know, there's a lot of law enforcement related to laws relating to drug use. So it seems that, like other areas where our law enforcement has a relationship to the community at large, the drug and alcohol use issue is a big one, as is traffic law enforcement. So I'm hoping we can use this opportunity, this chaos in a way that we've been thrown into with respect to, you know, behaviors, what we can and cannot do, particularly with respect to alcohol in town, with the impact on bars, that we really try to think through how we could improve our in effect, better try to self-regulate with respect to our alcohol consumption, perhaps give students more opportunities for socializing other than in the bars, just various ways in which we could improve our record with respect to alcohol consumption in Iowa City. So those are some of the key elements that I've been focusing on, again, using the framework that IFR presented, which I found did seem to touch on a number of the areas where we do have some major issues which we can address with respect to policing.
I'd like to start out by thanking the staff for taking such good notes at the listening posts and for including the online public comments here for us. That was very helpful in condensing things. And as John mentioned, there were recurrent comments about the Oregon CAHOOTS program, and that is the Crisis Assistance Helping Out on the Streets program. And the program seems to be functioning very well in the Eugene and Portland areas. But when we look at this program, we have to keep in mind that it was developed and has been functioning there for over 31 years now. That's a long time to be in existence and get things right. So this is not something that can be developed overnight or even in our case by December. But of course, by December, we could maybe, if it would please people, have it on our list by December to perhaps consult with them, at least get some ideas from them on how they got started and what they needed to do that. I did read an article that said that individuals in Oregon are willing to consult with any community that might be interested in a similar program, which is something we should keep in mind, and perhaps by our December date. Apparently, also, there's an interest in the U.S. Senate for a bill that could provide financial resources for communities to pursue similar approaches as CAHOOTS and to provide funding and maybe even grants to get that on the ground. That could also be something we could keep in mind and keep an eye on for that. Of course, that's going to probably be later than December and depend on who's in office there in DC. Our community already has a good base, I believe, of resources that could play roles in such a program. The Community Crisis Center has been taking calls such as the ones the CAHOOTS program is modeled after for some time now. And of course, the GuideLink Center will be opening very soon. Again, not before December though, which will provide centralized location for individuals in a mental health crisis. And I think that's what we heard over and over again, especially from those folks who are involved in the mental health field, that is a very big need in the community. It's being met, but there's even greater need for it. If we were to consider putting such a program together, though, it would be helpful kind of to start by looking at what percent of the current police budget has been utilized for such calls by police officers, and even having serious communication with those officers who typically handle those calls to get some idea from their perspective. And when considering such a project, we would have to look seriously at all the aspects, especially the financial ones, that would cover it. It would be 24/7 operation, including well-trained dispatchers and responders, and of course, a need for vehicles. The Cahoots program have their own vehicles. And if that is indeed, though, what the route that the council would choose to take at some point, I would go along with that decision, because it does sound like it's a big need and would be helpful. Also, back to John's comments about his traffic cameras. He's talked to me about that quite a bit, and I think it's an excellent idea, and I think that is something that we could look at doing before December, is installing some of those, because I think, as he sort of alluded to, those cameras are colorblind. They're not, the stop is going to be just whoever the driver is, and it won't see the color of the driver, which I think can eliminate any sort of potential discrimination on that. And also, he mentioned the decriminalizing marijuana. And I think that's also something we could look at prior to December. Another item in our meetings today is about our legislative priorities. And I think we can't forget about that, stressing that enough to our local legislatures, although I think most of our local ones are on board with that, but stressing that to them and to our lobbyists, that's a priority for us, because I think that is important.
Mayor, I'd like to maybe drill down into this a little bit deeper, because I think, I've had a couple conversations with staff, and I think maybe we're even a little bit further along than we all together have talked about. And I know we each went to different listening posts, so each of us got a little bit different perspective from the particular topics that were there and the data that was offered in advance of those. But I feel pretty optimistic about the information that we've collected already, as far as assessing a program like Cahoots, as well as having a good idea of the number of crisis-related calls that we have. I mean, we had that information available for those listening posts. So I would just ask Jeff, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot, if you could just speak to kind of where we are in learning more about those kinds of programs and other alternatives, because I think that's really what the public is looking for, and what I think all of us together as a council is like, what are the options, what's worked in other communities. And I think we've heard a lot of, Cahoots exists, and if we're kind of beyond that in our research, maybe we could hear about that.
Yeah, thank you. I'll jump in, and if I get a little long-winded, I apologize. By all means, cut me off. But we are, as staff, we're not sitting around and waiting for you all to make decisions. Part of what we're trying to do is anticipate where you're going, and try to get 2 steps ahead, so that when you feel comfortable and you make your decision, we're ready to go. So we are reviewing policies on our traffic stops right now. We're reviewing policies on pretextual stops. We are looking into the Cahoots model. We have spoken with the Eugene, Oregon Police Department, and we have information from them on their program, and our staff has also reached out to the nonprofit that actually runs that program. So those are just a couple of examples of how we're trying to get ahead on these issues. But specific to the notion, if there's one thing that you heard loud and clear in the public input and the listening post, it's that people want to connect those in crisis with a crisis professional that can best produce long-term outcomes for them. Whatever their crisis may be, they want to make sure that whenever possible, it's not a law enforcement officer that has to solve that problem, but it's a trained professional that is there, that can connect them with, again, the resources they need for the best long-term outcomes. And it's really helpful for me to think about this as a spectrum. And one thing I really want to stress to council, and I'd stress to the community as well, is that there is no one model that's going to solve everything across this entire spectrum of calls that we get. We can't adopt cahoots and think that that's going to take care of all of our crisis calls needs. It's not. So let me kind of walk you through just how I think about this a little bit, and I'll try to give you some examples of each of the steps. But it kind of ranges from what the best outcome is to what the necessary outcome is. So the best outcome is we prevent the calls from ever happening. Okay. That means we have a really strong social service network that is engaging with our population, that is helping them. It helps prevent them from ever being in crisis. That way the calls never happen. We do that through our programs like aid to agencies. So how can we bolster those programs to get the nonprofits the support to help people before they enter crisis? And then there's community awareness and outreach. And I was not able to attend the last listening session. I was the only one I missed, but what I took away from that and just reading the notes and talking with staff is there was a lot of conversation about the need to educate the community too about when it's appropriate to call the police and when it's not. And we can play a role in that community education as a city, but you know, the example that perhaps was used is you should not call the police when you see 4 Black juveniles walking down the street. That's not suspicious activity. Don't call the police. We have to make that message loud and clear on when it is appropriate to call the police and when it is not. And the community has a role to play. So that gets to things like, you know, the ongoing training that we're trying to offer the community through our Human Rights Office. We need to be able to ramp that up. Again, that's preventative medicine. That's trying to make sure that that call never happens. And then there's targeted outreach where we need it. So where do we have really acute problems in Iowa City or acute needs, and how do we target that? So one would be homeless outreach. And we're having some really good conversations with the shelter house on what additional homeless outreach services could look like. In the past years, you know, we've been really proud of the work that our downtown officers have done. They've essentially functioned like street outreach workers, right? They're not out there enforcing laws against the homeless. They're trying to connect them with services. But let's rethink that, and let's try to take that away from the officers, even though they do a really good job at it, and you've all seen that. But how do we get a professional street outreach worker that is employed by a social service agency to do that targeted outreach? So those calls, again, never take place. They're out there, they're meeting, they're talking with folks, they're de-escalating things before they even escalate, and thus that call about a concerned person in downtown never actually comes into the department. So again, that's the preventative section. That's the best we can do, is let's eliminate those calls. And so there's some short things there that we can do, and there's some long-term things there that we can do. This idea of a civilian street outreach worker that's employed outside of the police department is one that we can do, I think, fairly short term. We're having some very productive conversations on that. And again, that's not waiting for your plan. We hope to try to piece that together and present it to you as a start right there. Expanding social service outreach and broadening their ability, kind of that first thing I talked about, that can't happen overnight. You can't just snap your fingers and double the amount of services that are being provided by those nonprofits. That's a longer term process that's going to take years of concerted effort by the city and frankly from the entire community. So again, both short and long-term things that we can do with the preventative option. So the second, once you move from the prevention piece, kind of that second piece of the spectrum that I think about is diversion. If you have to make a call, how do we divert those calls away from law enforcement when appropriate? And that's, you know, we have, thankfully, the mobile crisis unit already established here. So how do we bolster mobile crisis? How do we you know, make sure that we can use their existing resources to the best of our ability, but also how can we expand them? In Iowa City, the last couple of years, They've been between 500 and 550 calls, our mobile crisis unit for the community's mobile crisis unit. How do we move from 500 calls to 5,000 calls? How do we start to bolster that mobile crisis? Is a question we have to dive into. Is that expanded staffing, or is that a different type of staffing? You know, Cahoots has EMTs that are part of that unit too. So is it a different skill set we need to incorporate into mobile crisis? And then it's also just promoting that service. I mean, before these conversations were taking place, how many of us knew mobile crisis existed, and how many of members of the community know mobile crisis exists now and that service is available? Do they know how to reach them? Do they know the phone number? Do they know that there's a text option or a chat option? We have a role to play to promote those services, so those calls from someone that's in crisis gets diverted away from law enforcement. And then there's, I think, one of the big lessons that I took away in hearing the police chief from Eugene, Oregon speak is that 911 integration piece is really important too. And that's something that they've accomplished, which is an impressive feat, because you don't see that very much throughout the country. But how do we work that 911 dispatch into how do we work mobile crisis into our 911 dispatch system? And another diversion, and this one's a little bit different because it's still internal to the city, whereas the others are external to the city. We do have non-sworn personnel in our police department right now that respond to calls for service. Are we maximizing those opportunities as well? You're familiar with our CSO, our community service officers. They are in the white pickup trucks. Those are unarmed individuals. They're not sworn officers, and they handle a number of calls per year. Do we expand that staff? Is there a demand? Are there calls that staff can again respond to? So again, this is the diversion piece. We went from preventative to diversionary, and with the short term and long term, again, there's things that we can do. I'll start on the long term this time. 911 integration. That's not going to happen in a couple of months. We're not going to get that done by December. We're probably not going to get that done by next December. But it's absolutely a long-term goal that we can and we should work towards. How do we bolster mobile crisis staffing? That maybe is kind of a medium-term type of issue. Again, we need to study our calls for service. We need to really collaborate with the mobile crisis team and figure out how best to scale that type of operation. And in the short term, we obviously can do a much better job as a city in promoting the existing crisis services in the community. We do have strong communication capabilities. We have a platform as city officials. We can absolutely be creative in the way that we promote those services to the community, and hopefully maximize the capacity for the existing services. So I told you I was going to be a little long-winded. Thanks for bearing with me. I'll speed up here. But we have the preventative, diversionary, and then there's kind of a co-response segment that I see. And this is where the PD has to take on kind of a secondary role. These are going to be calls in which the mobile crisis unit or the crisis teams outside of the city, social service agencies, aren't exactly comfortable responding to the call based on the information that they know. So this could be still leading with a crisis professional, but having kind of police there as a secondary responder, ideally a plainclothes officer and not a uniformed officer. That kind of stages behind and assists as needed until all the details of the situation is really until they're all really known. And then this, of course, can also tie in the future to that 911 integration. Again, that's a very long-term option, but we're always going to have those situations in which the initial call that comes in leaves enough ambiguity to say, for the social service providers, the crisis providers, to say, I'm not exactly sure what this is. Please come along with me to the police department. And again, how can we respond in a very non-threatening kind of backup type of approach to make sure everything's safe, but also make sure that the crisis professional is front and center. Now, when you start this type of program, we don't have the volume of calls to keep a co-responder, busy from whatever shift they have. There's going to be lulls in the day, so you get the benefit of that professional doing some other things. They can do preventative work too. They can follow up with people that have had law enforcement interactions maybe the last week or two to make sure that they're getting the care that they want. And they can educate officers on other options that are available in the community when they encounter. They can help kind of dissect maybe calls for service that happened and help train your officers to ensure better responses going forward. So that co-response model, because we're just not of a size of community where they're going to be going call to call for crisis type of calls, there's some additional benefits outside of that kind of co-response segment. Again, 911 integration, long-term, short-term. You all know, I think it's been reported in the paper that the mental health region, the East Central region, opened up funding applications for a co-responder type of position. And we have applied for those funds. And I just want to be clear about that. That does not mean that is the one model that we think is going to solve all our ills in the community. As I'm trying to paint a picture right now, I think it can really help in one small segment of what we need to do, but by no means does a co-responder really help us get to those goals of diversion and prevention that I just got done talking about. But I do believe that if we're awarded these funds from the East Central region, that we can bring a great deal of benefit. And that would not be a police department position. That would be a position outside of the police department that works closely with the police department in responding to those calls. So, as that process unfolds and as they make their decisions, we'll certainly come to you, and your approval will absolutely be needed. But I think that's an example of a potential short-term stride that we can make to really have us focus in this particular segment of the spectrum. And then the last piece, so we move from prevention, diversion, to co-response, to what I kind of think of as stabilize and hand off. When it's absolutely unavoidable that police need to respond, these are going to be cases in which there's violence being displayed or a weapon, and you have to have the police front and center as opposed to secondary. How do we make sure that our officers have the appropriate training, the right policies in place to best be able to de-escalate, use the least amount of use of force that's necessary, hopefully no use of force, and then hand off. So that's the stabilize and then hand off. And you can think of the handoff as taking that person to the GuideLink Center, taking that person to the hospital, connecting them with mobile crisis resources or whatever it is that they may need, making sure that our officers are supported in their efforts to do that, and that they have all the tools and resources and community support they need to be able to do that. That is always going to be short term because those calls happen on a regular basis. So we have to be committed to that every single day. That's just has to be an everyday focus. Longer term, we've been working on these things and we just have to stay committed to them. Cross Park Place, GuideLink, those are examples of that handoff that I'm talking about. Those aren't enough. I mean, we're already kind of, the community is turning its focus to a second Cross Park style place. And two of these, facilities aren't going to be enough. So we have to continue to stay committed. And just as you heard in your GuideLink presentation, that facility is going to be a tremendous benefit, but we can't pretend it's going to be the cure-all. We're going to know that we need to know that there's going to be additional needs. And, for example, the GuideLink Center is not going to handle juvenile referrals. So we have to make sure that we're thinking long-term about what's that best handoff for juvenile referrals. So again, that short-term focus is every day because it's how we respond to every single call that we go on. But the long-term, the council needs to remain committed, and I know you will, to those long-term handoff solutions. So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it in my mind, and I just encourage you to really think about the variety of calls that we get, and make sure that you know that one type of response model is not going to be sufficient. I think we have to be committed to multiple types of models and prioritize and push as many calls as possible to that first end of that spectrum, which is that diversion prevention. But co-responder is going to be necessary because there are going to continue to be calls in which there is some type of public safety concern. I hope that's helpful. It's at least how I'm kind of framing things after listening to the community conversation at your listening posts.
Well, I must say I found that very helpful. I think presenting this on the spectrum that you did, Jeff, really of, trying to avoid the problems in the first place, and get people help before the call is made, all the way to, that handoff when it does involve the police, and all the various components in between. I think it's just, for me, that's really, really, really helpful in terms of the way you frame that and how we look at, I don't know if you really call it restructuring, but how do we take some of that load off from the police department? And so how do we look at adding to the resources, either through city staff or through contracts with nonprofits, et cetera, to help us? But I found that, and I apologize for my being gone. I had an internet glitch and I've relocated here. So I missed some of the conversation, but thank you, Jeff. I think that was very, very helpful. And I really like that perspective. And I like proceeding in that direction of looking at the various pieces along the spectrum and how can we start working on each of those right now, and which of those are going to be a little bit longer term pieces as well. What it doesn't fully talk about is really the Black Lives Matter issues. I mean, what I walked away from in terms of the sessions that I was involved in, and also in reading all the information in the packet, was it seemed like an awful lot of that public input was directed towards the mental health issues and their interaction, people with those problems and interaction with the police. There was not as much in terms of the racial issues. And so we have to still make sure we're looking at that. And I think the training, making sure what the training is, there's enough of it. And I think getting out to the public how much training our officers do, because I think most people do not understand the amount of trainings that is done. And I think always, rethinking and relooking at what that training is and improvements that we can make over time, et cetera. And again, outreach. I know there's a lot of discussion at Dream City about that. So making sure that we're not overlooking those aspects in terms of trying to make those connections between the police department and the various communities within town.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, Susan. And what I presented is by no means the extent of the plan. I mean, that's a central component of the plan, but there's absolutely a lot more that you charged us with that would have to be presented. And again, one thing I just want to make clear, I think I started with this. We are trying to be ahead on this on staff, and you're not always seeing that because we're not quite ready with all this stuff yet. And we want to make sure we're not getting some in front of you, or your direction may be a little bit different. But you will continue to see policy changes and ordinance changes and things like that as we go through our own internal reviews. So just because your June resolution specified use of force and body cams and duty to intervene doesn't mean that's where we're stopping. As staff, we're taking a much more comprehensive look at all of our policies, because those policies were identified because of a specific situation. We all know the next situation is going to have a lot different circumstances to it, and we're trying to do our best to anticipate what those are and make sure that our policies reflect the exact actions that we want or officers to take on the street.
So I've attended 4 of the meetings, and I would concur that a lot of the language was related to, can you all hear me okay? All right. A lot of the language was related to mental health, and I certainly have a heart for mental health, and I believe that the Cahoots model does offer us something that we really can look very closely at. As Jeff mentioned, there's other opportunities that we learned through the East Central region, and I do believe that we'll have to look at a few models and try to figure out what's right for our community. I know that Councilor Taylor talked about opportunities of collaborating with Cahoots and maybe even a visit. If we're going anywhere, I want to go just so that people know, because I would love to see what Cahoots is doing, or if there's another identified community policing that is happening throughout our nation. I would love to be a part of that. Of course, 911 integration, I think, will be very key as we move along this continuum. And I've said it before that whatever we start, this is not the end, but I do believe that we have to start somewhere. The one thing that I do want to do is elevate the Black voices that I've been in conversation with, because one thing that was missing a little bit from the conversation was, how do we address some of the concerns that we have when it comes down to police and people of color, the BIPOC population. I do believe that we have to get some concrete things within our policies, that we identify, some things, and all of that is good. But I also believe that the voices of the BIPOC, the people that I've talked to, what they've said is, we've been saying a lot of stuff for years about how the treatment has been a little different at times. And I appreciate Councilor Thomas talking about, the lights, the traffic stop lights or the traffic stops, and how we can, look at other opportunities within our community where we can certainly enforce the law when it comes down to speeding, but also decrease that disparity that is happening amongst people of color. So I think there's great opportunities here. The other thing that I'll just mention is, and Councilor Taylor talked about this, marijuana. We're going to be talking about what are some of our legislative priorities. And I believe that marijuana, especially when we sit adjacent to a state where marijuana is legal, Illinois, and we're here in Iowa, and we're criminalizing marijuana. And I know that comes from the state, but I know that Madison, Wisconsin, they just passed an ordinance where the penalty for possessing 28 grams or less of cannabis is $1. And so their state is not legal, but the city, whether it's whether they're violating the state law or not, that's what their county did. I'm sorry about that. That's what their county did. And so I believe that we need to look at not only some of the things that we're doing with policy, but we need to look at some of the things that is happening with our state that is not here yet, and be very, very aggressive and bold in what we do. And again, I cannot emphasize enough some of the Black voices that I've heard, and myself included. We've said enough. We already know a little bit of what the challenges are within our community. We're going to continue to share specifics of what those challenges are, but it's time for action. And I appreciate Jeff and for your presentation tonight. Of course, there's a few things that I would make comments about, but I don't think I need to do that right now, because overall, I know that the intent is for for council to receive something that we can look at, the public can weigh in on, and we can move forward with our initial plan, which we plan to have in December.
think what you just said, Mr. Mayor, is really powerful. One of the areas that I just want to say a couple of things having to do with what Councillor Thomas mentioned and Councillor Taylor with respect to traffic. We can figure out a way to do better there. I think that I looked up Lansing, Michigan. They have a program now, or at least they have a pilot program where they're essentially saying no to pretextual stops, only for matters of public safety. And I think that we need to take a good look at that. We can't just sort of put up speed cameras because it's illegal under Iowa City law right now. So we're going to have to deal with that whole debate and I think that's a way to go as well, because but we have to be prepared for a real conversation on that. And you know, there are different ways to get minor car issues fixed. It's like driving while poor, essentially, if you have taillight problems and other issues. Fire stations, for example, regularly hold sessions to show people how to install child car seats properly. There's no reason that we can't have something similar from the police to just say, hey, come and pick up a coupon, do something, but it doesn't have to be in the form of a stop, and it doesn't have to be something that's really going to, it can be something that creates goodwill in the community rather than difficult relationships is all I'm trying to say.
I think that's a good point, Janice. And we do have the bulbs program, which necessitates a stop. You know, we will give you a coupon to get your defective equipment fixed, but that necessitates a stop. So how do you take that same platform and just, you know, create that environment outside of a stop? That's a real good thought.
Well, I know that this is important to counselors, and so yeah, I guess I just wanted to get a consensus. Is council comfortable directing city manager to come back with some proposals? I'm seeing some shaking of heads, so yes. All right.
Okay, Mayor, just to be clear, our goal is the get the plan out by December 15th, and we'll accomplish that. But I fully expect that between now and then, we'll have some of these incremental steps in front of you. So we won't wait for the plan. If there's opportunities, whether that's policy changes or positions, those will come before December. And of course, you always have the ability to defer action if you're not quite comfortable, but this is not a situation which we're going to wait till December to take action.
All right, thank you so much. All right, let's go on to clarification of agenda items. And this is for the formal agenda. Hearing none. All right, we're going to go on to, let's tackle October 8th. Wait, let's tackle, let's go ahead and do October 8th packet, info packet. Is there anything anyone wants to say there?
Just quickly mention IP6, the invitation for October 23rd, the ribbon cutting for the mural in the South District.
And that starts at 4:30 or 3:30.
3:30 to 5 p.m.
Yes.
10:30 Cross Park Avenue. So it's on the east side of Pepperwood Place is the mural on Broadway there, but Cross Park is on the south side.
All right, hearing nothing else from October 8th, we'll go on to October 15th, and we're going to start here with IP7, and we'll start with the Assistant City Manager on this item, Introduction to Solar Study Concept for Johnson Clean Energy District.
Thanks, Mayor. I will just summarize very quickly what this memo is for that was included in the packet. Earlier this year, the Johnson Clean Energy District members approached our office and the Climate Action and Outreach Office about this proposed idea that they had to generate a study and further explore opportunities for solar throughout the community. So everything from smaller solar projects to larger scale projects, and identifying them through a plan that would be developed with community stakeholders, bring in expertise from everyone from the university to other technical experts that could help, advisory assistance from our utilities and any other community partners. And the second piece of their proposal is intended to really generate awareness of the opportunities that solar may bring in the community. And so seeing that our climate action and adaptation plan includes an expectation that we'll consider or pursue additional opportunities for solar projects, this fits in with those goals. And we had suggested that they bring their idea first to the Climate Action Commission for some feedback and any advice that they may give. Wanted to make sure that the commission was first supportive of their idea. At their early October meeting, they were supportive of this being brought to you for additional feedback. And essentially, the next steps would be a joint partnership. At this time, there's not an agreement or any funds changing hands, but the idea is for stakeholder meetings to start to further explore the idea of solar opportunities with the couple of potential partners I had mentioned and a few others. And ultimately, the goal is to increase engagement and awareness around solar projects, potentially find a project that could be from the city, and also supported by community stakeholder feedback and support, as well as the council. So this is just the first step, and we wanted any direction or feedback that you had before we pursued something like this. And we would, of course, keep you updated through the process. So I just entertain any feedback you have if you want us to go ahead.
I think it sounds like a good idea. And I think particularly after what we had happen with our project with Mid-American, where I think staff and the council to a certain extent got a bit blindsided by the negative public reaction. I think to take this kind of approach and really have a group that wants to get out there and engage the public and get ideas of what's important to them, what kinds of areas they would see as acceptable, particularly on public land for solar arrays, I think would be really advantageous for the city. One, to hopefully get more solar out there, and to know ahead of time kind of what that public response was going to be before staff and or any other entity doesn't get too far down the road with something and then realize we're not going to have the support we thought we would.
I mean, I think it's also an organization or a group that can help build consensus in the community and create consensus and create room for ideas that, so for example, if it had existed before we dealt with the Mid-American project, we might have ended up tweaking it a little bit, but getting it through because there would have been broader community participation and knowledge about it. So I think it's and looking at the different kinds of solar, I personally think it's a really excellent idea.
I agree. I'm really enthused about this and supportive of it. I think it'll provide a foundation and a vision from which we can then identify specific projects that will flow from that vision and the foundation in a smoother way. One correction I would note, I tried looking up a couple of the sites that were identified in this memo, Bloomfield being one of them, and the other is State Center, not State City. So if you look on the map for State City, you're not going to find it. But it's a little small town, about halfway between Waterloo and Ames, Iowa. I mean, these are two small towns of maybe less than 2,000 people who have generated municipally owned solar farms of 1.8 and 1 megawatt. It's kind of a interesting examples of what a small community can do. But I'm really pleased with this and happy to see it move forward.
Just a quick question, Ashley, do you, I mean, my only, I guess, concern or question that wasn't answered in the memo is, are we worried at all that this will slow down the processes that are already in place with the Climate Action Commission and staff that are working on initiatives? Or do we're confident that this will supplement that in a net, sort of net positive way?
I actually think I have to give this group kudos for coming to us and recognizing a community issue that came up, and they had continued interest in pursuing this. And I think their assistance is actually going to further our ability to do a project like this. So, I think their assistance and that of our community kind of coming together on this type of project will actually bolster staff's ability to move projects a little bit more quickly.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Sound like there is consensus there. So anyone else want to chime in on that? Great. Thank you. All right. The next item is going to be IP8. And that's related to the 2021 state legislative priorities development schedule. So I'll let our assistant city manager talk about, are you going to talk about that? Or it's just scheduling is what we're doing.
Yeah, I think really what we're looking for from the council, we're going to present to you the draft legislative priorities at your next work session. And just want to be able to schedule some time with our delegation to talk through those, and knowing that their lives become increasingly busier as we approach the start of the session. So really looking, we've done it multiple ways in the past. We can try to have see who's available to join you at a regular work session. We also know there's a lot of demands on your work session time right now. We could set up a special meeting, special work session. Or you could appoint a couple of people from the council that want to carry the message of the legislative priorities to them, which would give us a lot more flexibility on scheduling. But it's really, there's no wrong way to do it. You'll publicly adopt those legislative priorities. It's just how best you want to convey those to the delegation.
I would be in favor of an in-person meeting with the legislatures, I guess via Zoom, probably not really actually face-to-face. And I think it's important that we as an entire council speak to them so that they know it's truly coming from the entire council. And I also did like the idea and believe that we should include our lobbyists. I don't think we have in our discussions before, but I think that would be important. Of course, that throws another iron into the coals as far as scheduling, but I think it'd be important to do that if we could, if possible.
I would agree with Pauline, and I know for many years we managed to do like an early morning breakfast. Again, I think it would be virtual, but if that helps with people's schedules at all, we used to meet like at 7:30 or something and be done by 8:30 or 9, or we tended to do a late afternoon. But My schedule tends to be pretty flexible, but I would agree with Pauline. I would prefer that it's the full council if we can make that schedule work.
I would prefer whole council as well. So the question, and I see some heads nodding. So the question would be is, do we do it within a work session? Do we extend our work session 1 hour? Maybe start the work session at 4 p.m. Or do we go a different time altogether? Big smile by Councilor Burgess.
I like the idea of a breakfast or something, but please not till 8. Otherwise, you're going to have a little kid running around my room like crazy.
I prefer just separate with them and different from our work session, because I think that does send a message to them also that it is important to us and that they're important to us and these issues are important to us.
Is there a typical day when that would take place by chance? No.
We can work with the individual schedules and try to find one that we don't know. I don't know if we'll get everybody, all council, all delegation, we'll do our best.
Okay. Does that sound good? We'll just have staff email us a time and we can work it out there. All right. We have a minute left. Anything before, anything anybody else want to say for the good of this time that we have together? All right, well, we will not have to come back to the work session, but we will see you at our 7 p.m. formal meeting, which is a different Zoom link. So we'll see you all soon.